As Governor Abbott convenes the Texas legislators for a special session, we've got to ask, are we going to see further delay tactics, or are we going to actually see people stand up for constitutional rights? Today on #Lawyer, we discuss the special session and the issues that our legislature will try to figure out during this time. Welcome back to #Lawyer, everybody. Andrea and I here in studio.
Live, in person, talking into your ear, whispering sweet legal things.
Well, I'm not going to be whispering too much, but I guess we'll see how this goes.
No, you'll be shouting, but it's fine.
That's how I talk. You know?
It's okay.
Well, it's funny you say that because Rachel actually says that my voice doesn't carry that well. I think just in conversation, I think I probably talk a little bit of a different volume. Maybe.
So are you trying to like LBJ me here?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think I'm just trying to project a little bit more.
Oh, okay. I see. Trying to be Harvey Specter.
Well, yeah, I'm always trying to do that.
Okay.
That's the haircut and everything.
Yeah, well, he's a good character, so I don't blame you.
The pair of sunglasses I was wearing this morning, I bought them because I saw him wear them on an episode one time. Seriously. I saw him, I was like, those are some really nice looking lawyer sunglasses. I think I need a pair.
What are they, Ray-Bans?
Perstalls.
Oh,
yeah.
It's a good brand.
Yeah,
It's a
had
good
them
one.
for 9 years now.
9 years.
Yeah.
You know what? Good for you. You pick a style icon and you stick to it.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Exactly. Well, on a different note, today we're going to talk about the special session that's been convened by Governor Abbott. And I thought, we both thought this was a good opportunity to talk a little bit about our Texas government and our legislature, because it is different. And a lot of people understand how it works on the federal level, but myself included, sometimes we take some things for granted on the state.
Well, and Texas, of course, God bless Texas, long live the Lone Star State. We do things a little different here, don't we?
Right.
And also, too, I think so much attention is given at the federal level, but like at the risk of getting trolls and haters, which I finally got my first troll comment.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
It was on the Britney episode. I feel
nice.
like I'm maybe legit now.
Nice.
And so, but anyway.
So, well, that's good though. We both finally got one.
We both,
I got the one about the strippers and the clothing in court a long time ago. So.
I feel like mine was probably a little bit more constructive because I could see where their opinion was coming from. They weren't educated about the guardianship process.
Gotcha.
And so they were saying, how could I ever think that guardianship was a good idea? And I was like, you didn't listen to the episode, clearly. That's fine. I'm here to encourage debate. Like, yes, please, like, say these things. Like, let's have a discussion. That is the point of this podcast. Anyway, I've derailed ourselves this morning.
That's okay.
I'm going to put us back on track here, heave the steam engine back on. And I just wanted to, like, really point out, people pay attention at the federal level, but how much does stuff at the federal level actually affect our daily lives?
See, I've always said that too. The state level, that affects more of our daily lives. It's more of what I call the grassroots part of our government, because it can have more direct action. By the way, because of the way our U.S. Constitution is set up and how much power is given to the states.
And I think a lot of people don't realize how much power has been given to the states. And true, a lot of it has been diminished in the last 200 or so years.
Right.
But there's still a lot more than people give it credit for. And
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, so kind of jumping right into this, we covered this a little bit in a previous closing argument where we talked about the fact that there was a walkout by the Democrats in the Texas legislature because they didn't want to provide quorum enough for a vote on some of these issues that were going on. And so what is quorum, right? It's the minimum number of people you need to actually vote on an issue. And so
fun fact, this actually comes from the Latin, I think comes from a Latin word, and it also comes from the old Roman form of government.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. I didn't know
you
that.
had to have a minimum number of members in the Senate to actually vote on any of the policies that oh gosh, I'm having such a blonde moment right now. Basically, their version of the president who was bordering on dictator that Julius Caesar was before he turned into an empire.
I was just calling him the Caesar, but I know that's not the right term.
Yeah, that's post-republic.
Gotcha.
Wow, Mrs. Altieri, my Latin teacher, would be so sad. Sorry, Mrs. Altieri.
But
anyway,
it makes sense why they have
that.
It makes sense why they have that, right? Because if you could just sneak a vote by with half the people there, well, okay, that's you're kind of not serving.
You're not serving the purpose, and that's why people get so up in arms about what are called recess appointments. I actually just finished this book. It's kind of like a legal political murder thriller. It's pretty good. It's called...
Sounds right up your alley.
I love it. I'd lend it to you, but I think you're more into nonfiction, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, okay. That's cool. I'm still working on Just Mercy. It takes me a second. Anyway, one of the big things in that book was a president waiting for Congress to leave so he can make a recess appointment for Supreme Court justice.
Got it.
And what's a recess appointment?
When Congress is in recess, when they're not there, then the president has the opportunity to appoint somebody in the role that, well, in this situation, Supreme Court seat.
Yeah, without having to go through the confirmation process and basically circumvent Congress and the confirmation process, which kind of sucks. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, with these ideas of like quorum or I mean, even in your fictional situation there that you're talking about. My
fictional situation.
Well, we have all these, as people know, we have all these, I don't want to call them loopholes, but unique situations that can come up, and the political gamesmanship that we see on shows like House of Cards and other things like that. And there's some of it that's some reality in that. And so that's kind of what happened here that set all this up. So we've got the main thing, and we're going to go through this in a second, but the main issue that the Democrats were concerned about in the legislature here in Texas was the election bill that was going to limit some of the things that happen on election day and voting rights, which we'll talk about the specifics here.
And then we talked about the one in a previous episode in Georgia,
a
few episodes back.
Yes, we did.
And so similar voting bills have come around not just in Georgia, but also Texas, I think in Florida, Kentucky, and a few other places. Although I think Kentucky, maybe it was another state, but I thought it was Kentucky, actually kind of like expanded.
Really?
They actually had really restrictive voting rights, if I'm recalling the article correctly, and expanded it, but then people were reading it and they're like, this is still restrictive. Yeah. And they didn't realize the previous iteration of the voting rights were already kind of restrictive.
Right. So. Well, and I can tell you, we've had, just since January 1st of this year, we've had 17 different states enact, 28 new laws restricting different voting procedures.
I think that's so interesting that you're seeing all these states enacting stricter voting procedures. And when we say stricter voting procedures, I mean, I think one of the big things is like you just have to show ID, right?
Sure, that's part of it.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there is.
And I have my opinions on some of them.
Right. Well, and we're going to get into that when we get into the specifics of these bills.
I can't withhold my opinion.
Right. Now, same here. But so the big issue, amongst others issues, were that the Democrats, they knew that this Republican-controlled legislature in Texas was going to get this election bill passed. So they walked out, destroyed quorum, therefore it couldn't get passed. And then the session ended. And so then now we have a special session that's been called by Governor Abbott, and some of the issues they're going to discuss, I'm going to list them here and then we'll go back and talk about them because we want to talk about how Congress and the Senate in Texas work. But there's 11 issues up for discussion. The main ones are bail reform, social media censorship, limiting the choice of transgender athletes to participate in sports in public schools.
That's a hot topic right
big time.
There.
And then the big one is the election bill, which we'll probably dive into the most here on this episode. But like we said, let's kind of talk about the Texas, what I call the legislative overview. Sure. We've got two houses, just like in the federal government, House and a Senate, or two chambers, excuse me. The House of Representatives.
Come on, get the words right here, buddy.
Right. I do like the word chamber. It just kind of has this medieval kind of feel to it.
It makes me think of the chambers of the heart.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So in Texas, we have 150 members in the House. We've got 31 members in the Senate. This is something I learned looking at this. The Speaker of the House is actually chosen by the House at the beginning of the legislative session.
Huh. And I didn't know that either. Yeah. For the record, I didn't grow up here.
Right. That's true.
You did.
I did. I don't know if we covered that in 7th grade Texas history, but.
I was about to say. Gosh.
And then the Senate, just like the federal government, where the vice president oversees the Senate, the lieutenant governor, who is akin to the vice governor in other states, he or she oversees the Senate here in Texas. And one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is, unlike the federal system, this isn't as much of a full-time job for these legislators.
That's true, because the Texas legislature does not meet every year.
Right.
In fact, Austin, how often does our Texas legislature meet?
They meet they're starting the second Tuesday of every odd-numbered year. And they meet
odd-numbered year.
And they meet for 140 days.
So 2021 we got them, but we are not going to get them in 2022 because it's an even-numbered year. Which I think blows a lot of people's minds.
For sure.
And like my friends from California, they're like, wait, what?
Right. They're like,
what?
How do you guys get anything done?
Yeah.
And that's also keep in mind, that means that their salary is like $7,200 a year. And I think it's only paid when they're in session.
I think so. Yeah. And that's why so many of them actually have, I hate to say real jobs, because being a politician, I'm sure, is a real job, but they have to have other primary sources of income. So a lot of them are doctors or lawyers, or I don't know what else they do, but other things.
Only those two professions.
Only those two professions.
And that's what I was going to say, though, is that, they've got to have full-time jobs, other careers outside of this, which to me, I find impressive that they're able to, especially for that 6-month period, carry on their duties in the legislature and then also continue working in some form or fashion at their career.
Especially if they're a mother with children, particularly small children.
Right.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Hats off, ladies.
Well, and counterpoint to that, hats off to the father in that situation too. If the mother's away at Congress and in the session for 6 months, the single parent thing on either side is pretty tough.
Yeah. The whole single parent thing sounds extremely difficult.
Yeah. So they meet for 140 days, like we said, and the way that this was interesting to me as well. Bills can originate. So bills, that's what legislators propose to become laws. They can originate in either the House or the Senate in Texas. Whereas in the federal system, it usually trickles from the House over to the Senate. That's the way the typical pathway goes. But it can originate in either house. They do have to be proposed within the first 60 days of the session.
So there's a time limit.
There's a time limit.
So people need to be doing their homework and prepping things before the legislative session begins if they want to get something up and running.
Yeah, and there are exceptions. Yes, that's right. And there are exceptions. You can have a 4/5 majority vote to allow a bill to be introduced after the first 60 days. But it makes sense. You've got 140 days. You know how much politicians debate things. Yeah. And so you need to get the bills on the table.
I like that, right? You're putting a time limit on yourself. And so you're like, all right, chop, let's move it.
Right, exactly. And so when a bill originates, it goes to a committee within either the House or the Senate. The committee is where all the work is done. Let's get the language right. Let's talk to people about what they're going to vote for, what they're not going to vote for. And their job is to basically get the bill language prepped up so that they can present it on the House or Senate floor, hopefully for a passage. Is the idea.
For voting.
For voting, right, exactly. Sorry, present it for voting and hopefully for a passing vote on there. And there's a process we won't go into. That there's multiple readings that happen of the law on the floor. There's ways to get around that. Suffice it to say that eventually there's going to be a vote of yay or nay. Does this bill pass? Does it go on to the other chamber or not? And that's the key point, is that once it passes one chamber, either the House or the Senate has to go to the other side for their
pass
vote.
In the same language.
Right, exactly.
It can't be, purple and then be pink in the other one. It has to be purple in both.
Right.
If that analogy made any sense.
Well, yeah, you can't. Right, exactly. You can't change the color of the sign if you're making a law about new signs that are going to go on our state highways.
Yeah, there you go.
And then it goes to the governor's desk, and that's when we hear about Governor Abbott saying things like, "I will sign this into law," or "I will veto this." At that point. So typically, this happens. And excuse me, I want to point this out too. Any bill that passes, it takes effect 90 days after its passage.
Yes.
Unless there's a 2/3 majority vote in each house that gives the bill immediate or earlier effect.
Which is why if you, for some random reason, review legislative history, hi, appellate opinions.
Yeah.
So fun. Anyway, you'll note that the effective date of a lot of the laws say effective September 1st and then X year.
Yep.
And so for the longest time, I was like, what, why? And then I realized, because of the way the Texas legislature is set up.
Yeah. So. Now, I did also read that September 1 also coincides with the beginning of the legislature's fiscal year. So I think
makes sense.
I'm sure they chose the fiscal year beginning based on this policy because of the way it all plays out. But I was actually having a conversation about this with a friend of mine because the constitutional carry law is taking effect September 1st. It didn't get the 2/3 vote required to take effect immediately. So as part of the discussion we were having, that's how I kind of figured out.
How'd that discussion go?
Well, it just, we were just talking about the timing of it.
I see.
We'll save that. We need to have a Second Amendment.
We haven't really had a Second Amendment episode. Yeah, there's a lot of things people think it allows them to do or doesn't allow them to do. And
just to review, the quorum, the required number of legislators that are present when there's a vote is 2/3 of the elected officials there. And so if you have less than 2/3, you can't vote. And so what happened in June was at the end of the session, last night of the session, it ends. The Democrats walked out, took it down to less than 2/3, and therefore there couldn't be a vote on any of these 11 issues. And so then Governor Abbott exercises his power, and here's the part where we start spouting off pieces of Constitution, found in Article 3, Sections 5 and 40, and Article 4, Section 8 of the Texas Constitution, which authorizes the governor to call Texas legislators back to Austin for a special session. And here we are. Kitty. Right. Now, the interesting thing about this is a couple of parameters here. He has to specify, he or she, in this case, Governor Abbott, he has to specify in his calling or in his decree, these are the issues we're going to talk about, and they're not allowed to talk about anything else. So they can't go outside the bounds of it. Yeah, it does. It does. And it also keeps somebody from, sneak attack and bringing in something and ambushing the legislators with things they're not prepared for.
Yeah.
So has to line out the topics to be discussed, can only last a maximum of 30 days.
Like it.
But he can call as many special sessions as he wants.
That surprises me, actually.
It surprises me too.
Because here in Texas, we don't really like highly centralized government.
Right.
So that is very surprising for me.
And it gives the governor the opportunity to kind of lord over the legislative branch. And what's interesting is there doesn't have to be a break either. Governor Perry, back when they were dealing with some redistricting issues, he actually,
redistricting.
The special session ended at, I believe it was like 11 a.m. He called a new one at 3:15 later that day, another 30 days.
What the frick?
I mean, there's a part of it, I see the part where I don't like because it allows the governor to wield some power that seems like you got a little bit too much power there for checks and balances. At the same time, if you've got an unruly legislative body that won't make a decision, it gives him an opportunity or she an opportunity to say, no, you guys are going to sit here and you figure it out.
It sounds like when you have a deadlocked jury.
Literally, that just popped in my head.
Yeah, and the judge is like, you're not leaving until you come to a decision.
Right. So I found that very interesting as well. So let's dive into some of these issues. And like I said, there's 11 of them. We picked the ones that I think are the most controversial to talk about. And so we'll start with bail reform. And so what's on the table here is House Bill 20, Senate Bill 21. Primary focus is that it requires, the way the language is written, as proposed, is that it requires the accused who's arrested to post a cash bond, and if they cannot, they can't make bail. And just as a reminder for everybody listening, we talked about bail on other episodes, but if you post a cash bond, say that your bond is set at $10,000, you can post $10,000, they'll let you out, and then that money stays with the court as you await trial or whatever disposition you have with your case. That's cash bond. If you use a bail bondsman, you can post 10% of that. So you post $1,000, you pay the bail bondsman that, the bail bondsman puts up the rest of the money or at least guarantees the rest of the money, then they let you out. And so obviously economically, there's a lot of people that don't have $10,000 sitting around just waiting for them to get arrested so they can put up a cash bond.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad.
So it's a lot easier to get out with bail. And so what this is saying is it's going to require some more restrictions on that. It's not saying it's wholesale going to knock it out, but it's going to require on more serious offenses, you've got to post a cash bond.
And when we say serious offenses, I mean, what is this, like rape, murder, child molestation?
They're focused on violent offenses. So assaults, and everything you just listed there, things like that.
I'm cool with that.
Yeah, well, hold on.
You mess with little kids, you don't need to be on the streets.
What about the innocent until proven guilty? That's the other part of this. That's the other balancing
factor.
I get that. And I think the big controversy on this is that we've had a lot of lawsuits filed, and we covered some of that here last year, where the ACLU, especially here in Dallas, filed a lawsuit asking for bail reform, because the idea of bail is that, and I won't go off on a huge tangent here because I can talk about this stuff all day.
Oh, I know you can.
The idea is you got to ensure their appearance in court, protect the public safety, like you were talking about, and also ensure that you are understanding exactly what it is that, you've got to also protect their individual rights to allow them to look at their evidence against them, consult with their defense lawyer, all those things.
Sure.
So there are certain situations where bail is denied, and it makes sense because of the offense that's been alleged, and if they're a flight risk, all that, those kind of things.
Yeah, like for example, if you murdered someone and you're a dual citizen with Russia.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense to have.
Because you can't extract an American citizen from Russia.
Right. Exactly. But when the ACLU sued, like Dallas County, among other counties across the country, the idea was that bail was being set purely on what is the offense and do they have enough money to make bail. We are taking out, that doesn't analyze at all how serious a threat is this person to the community or anything like that. And so the ACLU and the federal court system said, you've got to do some kind of risk assessment. You've got to look at this and make a decision that's not purely, okay, aggravated assault, therefore $20,000 bail. And so this bill has been touted as a way to keep people accused of violent crimes in custody. But if you're asking, and this is where I'm letting my opinions come out here.
Oh no.
If you're saying, okay, our restrictions are going to be you have to post a cash bond. Well, that has nothing to do with you assessing what type of crime they were accused of and whether that person has a previous offense, whether they've been arrested before, because that factors into your bail as well, which to me, I mean, it's cookie cutter, but it does make sense. Someone's been convicted of a violent offense before they've been arrested for a violent offense. Okay, that makes sense to factor that in. Yeah, you have a
violent pattern of history.
Yeah, if it makes sense to factor that into your bail calculation. This bill doesn't take that into account. It just says you got to post cash, and that's it, really. And so that's where a lot of the controversy is that, okay, well, if you're really trying to protect the public against violent people, recidivism, coming back out and committing crimes again, well, let's do an assessment and figure out, are they, let's look at their background. Let's not just look at crime, cash, what are we doing here?
So say Joe goes out and
knocks off a convenience store.
Strangles the convenience store clerk.
Okay.
And steals $10,000.
Sure.
Why not? Runs out, gets caught, and then blah, blah, blah. Now he has to post bail. Say his bail is also $10,000. He has $2,000 in his bank account. So under this bill, he would have to basically go get a loan for the rest of the $10,000.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then put the cash up.
Yeah, but then he would be let out. Okay. Regardless of what his previous offenses were.
But he has an option. He has the ability to go get a loan.
He does.
If a bank would loan to him.
Yeah, or family or whatever. That's usually what happens in those situations. They get family or friends to try to chip in.
Here I am thinking going to a bank.
Gonna have to have some collateral. I don't know how much he got from that convenience store.
I don't know. Maybe he's got some really great Gucci belts or something. Maybe, I don't know. But
the problem there is that if you're just setting his bond at $10,000, well, what if Joe's got 6 previous offenses of violent crimes? And
I would want that to be taken into account because if he's strangled convenience clerks 6 other times, well, then I think his bond should probably be set higher than
or no bond.
Or no bond. Yeah. Then, if someone did it like once, if this is a first time offense.
Right. Or, say someone gets arrested for a DWI and they can't afford a lawyer, they can't afford bail. It's the first time they've ever been arrested. Their bond's not going to be that much different than someone who's there on their 3rd DWI. I mean, it'll be a little different, but if you're not factoring in pattern of behavior, and other things like that, then that's where a lot of the controversy, lies on that. Now, this next one, this
one's fun.
This one's a lot of fun because it's squarely within President Trump's, purview, and it's very obvious where the source of this came from. But it's social media censorship, and it's Senate Bill 12. It provides, as proposed, a legal recourse, meaning a way for people to sue,
like a cause of action.
Cause of action. A way for social media users to sue the platform like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram if their content is censored or if they are kicked off or banned or even if it's temporarily by these platforms. This
just makes me laugh because I think this is so ridiculous.
I agree. And the representative from Midlothian who proposed this, I saw his interview when this came out because he was the author of the bill. I did an interview about this on a local station, and there's no way around it. Like you can't impose the First Amendment on private entities.
You simply cannot, and these are all private companies.
They're all private companies.
And when we say private, it means that they're not government entities.
Right.
And so you can't. Yeah. There is no way that you can apply the First Amendment to these companies when it comes to posting content. It's not a thing. And with one exception that I can think of.
What's that?
You can't post child pornography.
Right.
But that also violates the terms and conditions of each of these platforms.
And so that was the next point I was going to hit on. Every time you sign up for these, just like your cell phone contract that nobody reads, there are terms and conditions that say, everybody, you can kind of vaguely remember you check the box.
Yeah.
Or by signing up, you agree to the terms.
It's click wrap.
Yeah. So with that, in those terms and conditions, and I've never read them, but I'm sure they say something about we have the right to suspend you.
I started reading it once. I got to the second sentence. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm just signing up.
Right. But I mean, they're allowed to say we can censor you. We can because they're a private entity, private company.
And look, I get it. Like, you don't like the way that maybe they're censoring your content. Well, but you agreed to that. And if you don't like it, then don't use the platform.
And that's the part right there. That's it right there.
And I feel like, but it's not fair. I'm like, well, you know what? Life isn't fair and you agreed to this.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. If you don't like it, go start your own platform, which someone did. It's called like GAT or Get or something like that.
Oh, really?
It's like a pro-Trump, I hate to say very conservative because I don't think that's an app description.
Sure.
But it's like a social media app.
Yeah.
That's like pro-Trump.
Well, and see, and that's perfectly within their purview too.
Yeah, they can do that.
Because then they can have whatever discussions they want there. And you can say whatever you want on these different platforms, but the platform has the right to shut you down. I mean, mechanically, if we look at this, the way it would happen is, let's say like I get censored on Twitter, and so then I don't even use Twitter.
I was about to say, do you even have a Twitter account?
I have a Twitter, but I use it just I look at what other people post. No one wants to really, no one cares what I tweet. I use Instagram.
So you're one of those people. You're like the lurker. You just lurk.
Sure. I make my voice more known on Instagram, I think.
Yeah, I do too.
So let's say that I get censored on Twitter, or I get banned, and then under Senate Bill 12, I sue Twitter for that. Well, they're going to immediately, and we don't have to get into all the details of how this works procedurally, but they're going to say, all right, terms and conditions, you signed them, you signed up for them, I'm allowed to censor you.
And especially in Texas too, because like, look, at the end of the day, in Texas, our courts love contracts. Like, as Texans, we adore the freedom to contract. And there's very little that you cannot contract for.
Right.
And so this is just not only a First Amendment issue, but also in Texas, freedom to contract.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. It's
a double whammy.
Yeah. And so it sounds great. It sounds like one of those like hell yeah, we're going to assert the First Amendment rights so that what happened to President Trump doesn't happen to us.
But this is not working. This is not First Amendment rights. In fact, I don't think if you're a conservative individual, I think you should be against this bill because you're saying, oh, we want more government control over speech.
Exactly.
That goes against everything a conservative stands for. Or maybe I don't understand what it means to be conservative because I tend to be more libertarian, you know, like whatever. But that's what I think.
Right. No, I agree with you. And let's just, for an example, let's talk about, okay, you saying something that's politically motivated on Twitter and getting banned from Twitter versus you holding a protest sign in a public space where you're making a political stance and making a political statement.
And let's be clear here. Public forum.
Thank you.
Right? So public forum is literally a place, a street, a park, the open ground in front of the state courthouse building.
I was going to say outside the courthouse.
On the courthouse steps.
Right.
Public forum refers to public steps, and that's where you're allowed to do your peaceful protest, hold your signs, so on and so forth. Public forum does not, and so many people don't understand this, does not refer to the internet or internet postings.
Right.
Okay? It doesn't.
Right.
There is no case law to support that. There is no law to support that. And when people come to me and they argue and they're like, no, the internet is a public forum. I'm like, it's not. Public forum is literally a place.
Right.
Not the internet, like a physical location where you can go and do your peaceful protest.
Yeah. And this will segue a little bit into our next topic, but if someone on Twitter posts a statement, or on Facebook or whatever, posts a statement that they're anti-transgender individuals, and then Twitter shuts them down, well, Twitter's allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Now, if you are protesting something with the transgender rights on the courthouse steps, the government can't stop you from doing that as long as you're not being, obscene or threatening violence, all those exceptions we talked about in our First Amendment episode.
Absolutely.
But that's the difference there.
Yeah. So like, for example, say you have Cindy, right? And Cindy is peacefully, quietly holding up a sign that says, transgender girls shouldn't wrestle or something like that. Okay, well, she's in a park, silently holding something on public property, holding a sign. I mean, that is completely within.
Can't stop her from doing that.
She's
Doesn't matter what
absolutely
you
within
think.
her rights.
Yeah.
You might hate it. Nothing you can do about it. Twitter, if that was on Twitter, that picture gets posted to Twitter, Twitter can delete it and then ban the account.
Because they're a private company.
Yes.
I know we're kind of going over the top on that, but like the idea of being a private company versus a public entity or the government controlling a public space is something that I know you and I talk about a lot. People misconstrue that.
They do. They misconstrue it, and it drives me up a wall.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And so speaking of transgender issues, that is another topic that's here. And there's been a Senate Bill 29 that's been proposed, would mandate that transgender student athletes, and this is high school, middle school level at public schools, they play on a sports team based on their sex assigned at birth. Now, currently, the way the rule is written, in the UIL, which governs our sports here in Texas.
What does UIL stand for?
University Interscholastic League, which doesn't reference Texas at all. So I don't know why they don't have Texas, but that's what governs our public school athletic competitions and
for
academic
high
competitions.
school and middle school?
Mm-hmm. Here in Texas.
Even though it says university.
Right.
That's very confusing.
It is. It is. So the current rule states that an athlete's gender is determined by the gender listed on their birth certificate. The reason this bill has been proposed is that individuals can now change or ask their birth certificate to be altered.
That's right.
Based on their choice.
I forgot about that.
And so that's why Senate Bill 12, that's part of the reason Senate Bill 29 was put into play. Proponents of it say it's necessary to protect girls' sports. And actually, you mentioned women's wrestling, which is ironic because the main kind of poster individual for this situation was a transgender male who became and excuse me, I don't know the correct terminology.
So it was someone who was born biologically, right? As a boy. As he had an X and Y chromosome.
Yeah.
So the child had an X and Y chromosome at birth, and then later, felt that he was a she, and so felt that he should, be a girl, right? Yeah. So someone with two X chromosomes, and then underwent the treatment to become a female, correct?
Right.
So that's transgender girl.
And so some controversy came up with their wrestling, participation. And so this one has been, it's obviously a hotly contested situation across the country. And then here in Texas being a traditionally conservative state.
Traditionally conservative, but honestly, if you look at the last voting cycle, and one of the things I do when I'm writing reports on upcoming cases for a lot of my insurance clients is we do an evaluation of the venue that we're in and potential jury pool or jury panel, excuse me. And it's really interesting to see the more purple Texas has gotten. It used to be wildly red, wildly Republican, but now there's there's a lot more individuals who identify as Democratic or so on and so forth instead of just having a solid Republican majority.
Sure.
So,
well, and the interesting thing about it kind of as a microcosm of what's going on with that, the people on both sides of the aisle are catching a lot of criticism for their stances they're taking on this specific bill.
Well, and and this is extremely polarizing. No matter what you say, I'm sure someone's going to get very mad at me for the way I tried to break down and explain, transgender.
I was literally thinking that same thing. I'm sure they will. I thought you did a good job, but I'm sure that you said something that was incorrect.
I'm sure I said something that someone is going to be upset with me for. Y'all, I'm doing my best. I'm happy to learn, but it's just with this issue, especially because it involves children.
Right.
I think no matter what you say, people are going to be mad at you. Yeah. And no matter what bill is put in place, people are going to be angry.
Right.
Because, for example, if you are for this bill and you want to say, well, girls have women have always been stepped on by the man, right? And so at the end of the day, we had to have Title IX for women's sports.
Yeah.
And so finally women get their own sports, and now you're allowing transgender girls to come in when they arguably, due to biologically how they were born initially, have physically superior capabilities in some aspects.
Yeah, the argument, the literal argument that's been thrown around in the House, in these chambers, have been that they have more testosterone, therefore have a strength advantage over
and they can put on more muscle.
Right.
I can lift. Well, I actually can't lift very much. I have very little upper body strength. So we found that out in college on the swim team. My coach was like, why can't you put on any muscle in your arms and back? And I was like, I just can't.
Yeah.
I try.
Yeah.
But so I can't do it. No matter how much I lift, I'm not going to get super bulky. Most women, you're not going to get super bulky.
Right.
Okay. You lift, you're a guy, you're probably going to put on more muscle than me. Right. It's just the way that the makeup in our bodies are. Right. And so all that to say, there's going to be a difference, I think, when you have a transgender girl athlete.
If I had to guess, this one's not going to make it through the special session.
Probably not.
There's just too much controversy going back and forth.
It's too much controversy. And I still think transgender and these therapies for children who, identify as a different gender and undergo the therapies to become the gender that they identify. I think that's still new, relatively, with medical literature. And so there's a lot of unknown.
Yeah.
And so if you don't really know how it affects the children in their sports performance and you don't have enough studies, then maybe we should just like wait and see.
Well, see, and it's funny you say that because one of the sponsors of the bill, who is a Democrat out of Houston, he proposed some changes that would require more assessments and things like that. And he was just lambasted by a lot of the supporters of the opponents of this bill, because they said, well, no, now you're restricting, you're making more restrictions. And so that goes to exactly what you were just saying. No matter what side of this, everyone's a critic.
Everyone's a critic. And, if you're for the bill, then apparently you hate children.
Right.
If you're against the bill, then apparently, you hate supporting women's sports.
Yeah.
And it's no matter what side you take, people are going to be upset with you.
Sure. That's politics, guys.
Yeah. Welcome to the world.
Moving on to another very controversial topic is there's a law that's been proposed, House Bill 3979. The law has already been signed into effect. That was previously House Bill 3979 that prohibits kindergarten through 12th grade teachers from teaching about critical race theory.
This is so interesting to me. So my father-in-law has a PhD in education. And so he and I have had a few discussions about critical race theory and how it's taught in the classroom. So I find this very interesting. And maybe if we're lucky, we can get him on to talk about critical race theory.
That would be, so I've just learned about critical race theory here in the last 2 or 3 months.
I do not have a solid grasp on it. I've been trying. I think it's kind of complicated.
It is. It is complicated. And it's a very evolving topic as I'm learning.
It's not static. It's constantly changing. And so every time we talk about it, it's a little bit different.
And for our listeners who, like me a couple months ago, I'd never heard of this before. It's critical race theory is largely defined as an academic term that studies how race and racism have impacted social and local structures in the United States, and including one of the more popular concepts talked about right now, which is white privilege.
And when you use that definition, it seems pretty straightforward.
Right.
But then when I talked to my father-in-law, Dr. Turner, he's explained, he's like, well, it's not as simple as maybe a definition like that might sound, because it's critical race theory is interpreted differently depending on the academic institution you're at, the state that you're in, and
probably
so on
the human
and so
that's
forth.
actually teaching it.
Yes, exactly.
And so that's where the controversy lies in this. And in the special session, just to make sure I get this out there, the reason this is up is that Governor Abbott wants, he said, and he didn't really specify, he says that more needs to be done on this bill. Okay. So whatever that means. It's actually the same thing he said about the heartbeat bill, the abortion law that was passed. It was passed into law, but it's on the agenda for the special session because he says more needs to be done without really specifying what that means.
Yeah, I find that bill very interesting.
For sure. And so, with the race theory, we were talking about
critical race theory.
Critical race theory, we were talking about how the individual teaching and everybody's got different life experiences.
Yeah.
And the proponents of the bill are saying, well, we don't want those coming into the classroom. We want to kind of restrain and control, which you can tell by the verbs I'm using, what we're talking about here, which to me, again, is anti-conservative politics.
I would think so.
Trying to restrain and control how and what is taught in the classroom based on your personal experiences. It's kind of trying to take the color, that's probably a bad way to use it.
I was about to say, maybe we should
take the flavor out of your personal experiences into what you're teaching in.
How about we just say remove the personal experience?
Yeah, I'm trying to use an analogy here, though. I mean, you're taking the human element out of it.
There you go. I think that's a better way to go
because
about it.
We all bring in our own experiences when we're talking about and teaching things. So that's an interesting one, especially since it's already been signed into power, into effect. Excuse me. And so
I'm sure there are a lot of individuals, and I've heard a lot of parents, right, who sometimes they've removed their children from public school out in California or Oregon or Washington because they disagree with critical race theory and because they disagree with LGBTQ history and so on and so forth being taught to their kindergartners. And they feel, this is not my opinion, I'm just repeating what's been told to me by these parents, they feel that school should be there to teach reading, writing, math, history, general world and American history, so that children can do well on their exams, get into a good college, but also maintain the ability to critically think. Yeah. And so they feel that those topics are not achieving what those parents think should be the goals. Yeah. Especially at the kindergarten level.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, okay.
Well, and they have the right to pull their children out, go to private school.
Parents have the right to parent as they see fit with some exceptions.
Yeah. Yeah. And this reminds me, it's not the same thing because we're not talking about separation of church and state, but it's controlling content with this is kind of like some of the complaints about when prayer was taken out of school and all those kinds of things. It's, again, very different, but also there's some similar,
there's some similar
situations.
Feelings, I think.
Yes.
There's some similar feelings about things, about the content, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Content that either is very supported by someone with maybe a Judeo-Christian background.
Right.
And content that is anathema to some people who hold certain perspectives of a Judeo-Christian background.
Yeah, exactly. So the last topic, we say the best for last, is the election bill. And this is the one that caused the walkout. This is honestly the main reason, in my opinion, that Governor Abbott called the special session. And so the bill as drafted, it would limit early voting hours. It would add new ID requirements, and it would ban ballot drop boxes, which were currently used during the COVID election of 2020. Yeah. And the source of, most Democrats argue that this discriminates against low-income Black and Hispanic voters. And my assumption is that it's because of the types of jobs low-income voters work. There's not as much flexibility. They have to be at work at a certain time. And if you limit the places where they can vote, like drop boxes, then maybe it's not as convenient. And that's kind of the.
You can still mail in your ballot, right?
Well, that's part of the argument is that you can't do mail-in ballots either. That's part of
at
the bill.
all?
Right. Yeah. So they're trying to knock out. They're trying to go say that you can only do the traditional go stand in line.
Oh, that's
punch
interesting because I would say if you can't do mail-in ballots at all, that discriminates against college students.
I would agree with that too.
Because a lot of college students, I went to school out of state. I was literally, I grew up in California. Don't hate me, y'all. And so, but I went to school in Virginia, like a teeny itty bitty school out in rural Virginia.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I voted in California elections, but I had to vote by mail because I was all the way across the country.
Yeah. And I don't have all the specifics of the bill in front of me, but the idea is that because of the allegations from the last presidential election with the election fraud allegations, all the things that went on that we talked about here, on our show, the Republicans are trying to rein that in. And so the idea is really what you're looking at. It's the constant battle of protecting voter fraud versus expanding the ability for people to get their vote in.
Very delicate balance.
It is, and I'm gonna swing far left on this. In my opinion, I think that you need to make it as accessible as possible for everybody to go vote. You need to be able to figure out some way to safeguard that. There's ways to figure that out. You got people smarter than me that can figure that stuff out.
I'm sure.
But I think that when you're restricting the means and method of people being able to vote, well, then you're infringing on that fundamental right by doing
And I also don't see what the problem is with having early voting hours.
I don't either.
Like, how does that lead to fraud?
It doesn't. It just doesn't. If you're worried about people, if you're worried about fraud, there's better ways to attack that problem than this.
Absolutely.
And so this bill has a national impact. It's part of a larger national story. Talked about earlier. Between January 1 and June 21st, 17 states have passed 28 new laws restricting these types of voting procedures. And there's federal legislation that's out there now under the Biden administration. That's the For the People Act, House Resolution 1, which allows measures like internet registration, automatic renewal of your voting right or your voter's card, same-day voter registration, and other measures that just make it, in the proposals language, a lot easier to be able to and available to vote. And so I think it's an interesting race right now where you've got what the federal legislature is trying to do is to preempt or overrule basically a lot of these state actions that have already been passed. So it's going to be there's going to be litigation.
But wouldn't that be competing, right? Because look, I get if maybe you want to, like for federal elections, they can do that, but you can't tell a state what their voting measures are going to be. Can you?
Right. Well, it depends.
But then I guess voting is protected.
Right.
It's
constitutional protection.
is 14th Amendment, right?
It's found, I think, at the due process. Well,
that's due process in the 14th.
I think fundamental rights is found in the 14th Amendment as well.
I think so. I think civil liberties and fundamental rights are there. Anyway.
It's part of the protections at least.
And so, most, I think most, if not all of at least the original amendments, or at least 1 through 14 of the amendments in the Constitution have been brought over and now applied to the states.
Well, the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the 5th and 14th definitely have.
Yeah, they definitely have. And that's what we're talking about here.
Right.
So, then I guess Okay, yeah. Since it applies to the states too, then
right.
Well, that rule would apply to state and federal election methods.
Right. When you're dealing with the interstate commerce idea of affecting things across state lines and again, the fundamental rights portion. So, I mean, this is going to sound weird that I'm going to say this, but it'll actually be pretty exciting to see some of the litigation over this to see how it turns out, because we'll get to see.
You're a lawyer when.
Right. No, exactly. Because we'll get to see how is this going to play out at the district court levels up to the Supreme Court, because eventually if you've got these competing bills and competing ideas, they're going to fight over it, and we're going to get there, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And Texas is definitely, and I'm not just saying this is what a lot of people are saying when you read some of the news stories on this and opinions across the country. With what's going on in this special session, we're definitely taking a very controversial spotlight from the rest of the country because of all the things that are going on. And I mean, and why wouldn't we? We're Texas.
Lone Star State.
Well, guys, like we said, it's going to be a 30-day session at the maximum. It can be less than that. They can do more than that if they don't.
Are they going to do anything with the heartbeat bill? Because I'm very interested in this.
I didn't read a whole lot about what he wants to do more on the heartbeat bill, because I mean it's already been passed, and so they could add more restrictions, or they could tweak some of the language, I guess, add some amendments to it. But Governor Abbott didn't really pull back the curtain on what exactly is that he would like to see more done on.
That's wild, right?
It could just be a political stance if he wants his conservatives to know that he's in support of the heartbeat bill and that he wants more done on it during the session.
So interesting to me.
It'll be interesting. So by the time we release this episode, this will have been in session about a week, and so there could be some updates. So make sure go follow, see what's happening. TexasTribune.org does a great job of putting out updates on what happens on Capitol Hill in Austin. So check that out. Follow these different issues, and we'll see how the dust settles.
Hey y'all, don't go. We have closing arguments coming up for you in just a second. But before you listen, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you got any value from today's episode. And please share the podcast with others. And if you want to interact with Austin or me, or tell us what you want to hear next, you can find me on Instagram at andrea.s.turner, Austin at The Dallas Lawyer spelled out, or the podcast #lawyered spelled out. Look forward to hearing from you.
The ACLU filed a lawsuit in Maricopa County, Arizona, to attack coercive plea bargaining offers that are taking place in the district attorney's office. When an accused person shows up for their first court appearance in Maricopa County, the first thing they read on their sheet of paper tells them that if they don't accept the first offer, they'll face substantially harsher plea offers at subsequent court appearances. This decision, therefore, has to be made by the defendant, of course, before they ever have a chance to view the evidence that the state has against them or really assess their case when deciding whether to plead guilty or not. This widespread practice afflicts many state prosecutors' offices, including in Shelby County, Texas. And the ACLU alleges that this practice violates the accused's constitutional rights by punishing the person for merely exercising their right to view the evidence against them. I'm not shy in saying that I hope the ACLU gets a W in this case and lands a solid blow to this insane policy across our country.